Welcome to Andy Staples On3. Very special show for you today. As you've probably heard, we are on vacation this week, but we didn't want to leave you with nothing to watch/listen to. And also, we had a pretty fun idea. So a few weeks ago, I got asked a question during a Dear Andy show about what my favorite game to cover in person was. And it was the Boise State, Oklahoma Fiesta Bowl for me. And I explained why. It was the first game I'd covered after my mom had passed away. And it was a game that my mom, who was a massive college football fan, would have absolutely loved. And it was more about that than the game itself. But of course, it was also one of the greatest college football games of all time. And talking about that game and just bringing back the memories of that game made me think, okay, everybody has a favorite game. So why don't we take our team at On3, and we have all these amazing team sites, and we ask some of the folks from our team sites what their favorite game involving the team they cover is. And we've gotten an unbelievable response. So we've done 4 of those for this week. So today's show, we're going to be talking Tennessee and Michigan. Brent Hubbs of VolQuest, Chris Balas of the Wolverine, talking about their favorite games involving the Vols and the Wolverines. And then later in the week, we've got Jake Rowe from Dogs HQ and Spencer Holbrook from Letterman Row talking about their favorite games involving Georgia and Ohio State. And so today, we've got Brent Hubbs talking about the 2022 Tennessee-Alabama game. Oh, yeah, you remember that one. Goalpost sunk in the Tennessee River. Just an incredible scene. But you're probably thinking, if you're an older Vols fan, why that one? Why not 98 Florida? Why not 95 Alabama? Well, we talked to Brent about that, why he picked that particular game. And it's a fascinating answer. And it's also just a fascinating game when you dig into it. So we're going to talk about that one. And then later, Chris Balas tells us all about the 2021 Michigan-Ohio State game, which is the game that Michigan broke back in the rivalry. I know what you're thinking. Michigan won the national title this past year. It's not one of those games. No, it's the game where Michigan ended its losing streak against Ohio State, and all the circumstances around it and just the game itself were pretty incredible. So let us stroll down memory lane, and we'll start with Brent Hubbs of VolQuest talking about the 2022 Tennessee-Alabama game. Brent Hubbs from VolQuest is talking his favorite game, and he has chosen the 2022 Alabama-Tennessee game. But it was one of 3 finalists, and before we get into that game, before we get into the Hendon Hooker and the Bryce Young of it all, let's talk about the other 2 finalists that didn't make it, because I think they were both kind of program-defining wins, and one of them specifically, I think, is very similar to the one that Brent chose. So, Brent, you had the 95 Alabama-Tennessee game, the 98 Florida-Tennessee game, and then obviously 22 Alabama-Tennessee. So 95 Alabama-Tennessee. Why is that one such a big deal in Tennessee lore?
Well, because it ended a streak in Legion Field. It was Peyton Manning's true coming out party. That's Peyton Manning versus Brother Oliver, who was a defensive guru at that time. Tennessee scores on play number 1. Driving down I-59 to that game, Tennessee fans looked up and saw the number 9 on every bridge. Tennessee had a tie game, which was like, kissing your mother in 93, because Tennessee outplayed them and David Palmer had a 2-point conversion. And you kind of had this, was Tennessee ever going to beat Alabama? When was it ever going to happen? And that for Philip Fulmer was a major milestone win, because at Tennessee, listen, as Doug Dickey once said, you're paid to win 3 games: Georgia, Alabama, and Florida. And for a longtime Tennessee fans, Andy, it's the Alabama game. And that one solidified Fulmer, who also almost went to Alabama from Winchester. There was a lot of natural ties there, but that slayed the dragon in 95 and was a major milestone win. And kind of, that was a plant the flag win. And I think your question about best games is a really unfair question. I love you. You and I get along great, but it's a really unfair question.
I know.
Because is it the greatest game, or is it the greatest game because of its impact? And I can find games that were really better games, probably, Andy, but they didn't carry an impact because they didn't do anything with it. Think about where
Yeah.
Tennessee's program went after the 95 season and what they evolved and became into. That was the planting of the flag to the national championship in 98. So to me, the 95 Alabama game has to be near the top, if not one of the top games.
Well, 98 Florida, like 22 Alabama, that was a really good game. That was a very exciting game, back and forth, and kind of similar to Alabama, and also similar to the other Alabama game we're going to talk about. It was an obstacle that Tennessee just had not been able to overcome. So the Vols beat Florida in 92, which is the first year divisional play, but Florida ended up winning the East. And then Florida beats Tennessee 93, 94, 95, 96, 97. The 97 game, Tennessee ends up winning the SEC that year, but Peyton Manning had a bad game in the swamp. Tony George had the 89-yard interception return for a touchdown. So it's 98. Peyton Manning's gone. The roster is good, but it's not like I feel like everybody thought 99 was going to be the year. That was when everybody was going to be at full power. And turned out roster's pretty damn good in 98. And Florida comes in and it's back and forth. It goes to overtime. Collins Cooper misses that field goal in over. I thought so. I'm a student reporter at this point. And then obviously I'm a lot of those guys are former teammates at that point. And Collins' locker was like 3 down for my freshman year, and he misses the kick. And I thought the press box was going to shake off the foundation when he missed that kick. And I remember weaving my way through the fans on the field because I had to go interview people in Florida's locker room, and it was just like, that's as big of a party as I think I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, that one was, and to give context to that team a little bit, I go back to fall camp of 98. And I watched Tennessee scrimmage. This was back when Coach Fulmer had open scrimmages. They had a night scrimmage like the day before classes started or 2 days before classes started. It was kind of the end of camp big scrimmage. I watched Tennessee that night. Andy, I'm not sure they made a first down. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, you've seen Peyton Manning play for 4 years, and it's this offense, and it's going all over the place. And you're sitting there and you're watching them going, you know what? That they may not. I mean, they may win 6, 7 games. Get to a bowl game is pretty good. What you didn't realize at that point, when you watched that team scrimmage, you didn't have the sense of how far the defense had come in that offseason. And I've talked to a bunch of former players, defensive players, who talked about the lesson they learned from playing Nebraska in the Orange Bowl the year before, which would have been the 98 Orange Bowl, but it was after the 97 season. And they got manhandled. I mean, the Nebraska Army, Andy, comes marching out of the tunnel, and it's like, and I got down there to cover
a lot of those guys on that Florida team could have told you the same thing about getting a lesson from Nebraska that led to a national title.
Yeah. I mean, I got to Miami to cover that bowl game like on the 26th. And I remember vividly asking Scott Frost, what did you guys do for Christmas? Because they had been there a week because they got them out of Nebraska. He goes, oh, we had a 100-play scrimmage Christmas morning. And I was like, oh, now Tennessee's not ready for this. Tom Osborne's last game. The point being, after they got handled in that game, there was a monumental shift in off-season training, particularly for the defensive guys. And there was a core group of guys who like Peyton Manning. Al Wilson likes Peyton Manning. Fred White, they all like Peyton, but they were really tired of it being the Peyton Manning show. And they wanted to prove that they were a good program without Peyton Manning. And they had a chip on their shoulder, and they carried it through the summer. They can't score in fall camp, and you're like, okay, they're not any good. They go to Syracuse and kick a field goal at the end of regulation to win 34-31. And you're thinking, man, this team's not very good. But then you go back and look, and Syracuse has got Donovan McNabb, Marvin Harrison, Quentin Spotwood. They're pretty good, Yeah. And so Florida comes to town, and you're like, can they even find a way to score? And it was hard. But that defense was unbelievable that night. I mean, Deion Grant's
and Peerless Price making a huge catch.
Yeah. I mean, it was one of those, I don't want to say destiny things, but it was one of those deals. I mean, Tennessee gave up 500 yards of offense. but they were terrific in the red zone. They forced 3 fumbles. Al Wilson had a 3-fumble night. Raynoch Thompson picked up a fumble right at the goal line, which saved a touchdown. They popped the Sean Bryson play. I mean, that was again a slay the dragon moment, right? Here's Steve Spurrier, who has mouthed off about Tennessee. For Tennessee fans, he's the villain. You're never going to beat him, and finally, in an improbable way, because it was not the team expected to beat him. The 97 team was. The 96 team, that was a 1 versus 2 matchup in Neyland Stadium, and it was
and that game started at 29-0 Florida.
Yeah, I mean, they
or 35-0 Florida.
Yeah,
sorry.
That Florida converts on 4th and 19 on the first possession. You don't have your popcorn. You're not sitting down, and the game's over. And so this is the unlikely one that happened, but it set the course for Tennessee to go win the championship because they grew as the year went on. They weren't very good offensively. They got better as the season went along, and that defense and Al Wilson carried not only that night, but they carried the entire year.
Now let's get to the feature game here, which is also a slay the dragon situation, because
absolutely,
as much as Spurrier tortured Tennessee, and it's probably worse because Spurrier was torturing Tennessee when Tennessee was great. But Nick Saban running the most dominant program in college football history, and Tennessee having to be an annual rival, the cross-divisional opponent of that Nick Saban team. When Tennessee is going through some stuff, Brent Hubbs, like the wandering through the wilderness post Philip Fulmer, at that point, you didn't know when it was going to end. Like I keep going back to when Jeremy Pruitt got fired and Josh Heupel got hired and everybody poured into the transfer portal. Like I thought, oh God, when is Tennessee ever going to be able to come back? Well, this game was the moment Tennessee announced it was back. It was year 2 of Josh Heupel, year 2 of Hendon Hooker's starting quarterback, and Bryce Young, defending Heisman Trophy winner, is leading Alabama. Jahmyr Gibbs, future first-round draft pick. I mean, just that Alabama team's loaded. And they come into Neyland Stadium, and that was a plant the flag moment too, I think.
Oh, there's no question. And it was, again, I think those things, the 95 win at Alabama Tennessee was the better team. I mean, and they were dominant in that game. Okay. 98, those two teams could have played 10 times, and I'm not sure how many of those Tennessee wins. The 22 Alabama game was improbable just because of how that team was assembled. I mean, Hendon Hooker had done it the year before, was learning this offense, but Jalen Hyatt, what he does, and Tennessee.
Cedric Tillman's hurt. That's the other part that people forget.
Absolutely. And it's one of those deals, Andy, where it was a Tennessee. When you walked out of the stadium that night, Tennessee had a brand and an identity back. If that makes sense, they had found
absolutely
their brand, they had found their identity, and as a result of that, it changed the course of where Tennessee was and what Tennessee is under, and the expectations that are there for Josh Heupel now. I mean, that was the thing. I mean, I looked this up while we were sitting here talking because I wanted to get the stat. The previous 7 trips that Nick Saban had come to Neyland Stadium, Tennessee had been beaten by an average of 29 points by Alabama.
Wow.
Alabama had overtaken Neyland Stadium for 7 trips. I mean, they were dominating over Tennessee. And so to slay that dragon, to win that game, put Josh Heupel on the map at Tennessee. Hey, look here, they're real. Obviously, it got Jalen Hyatt up the draft board. It put Hendon Hooker in the Heisman race. It gave Tennessee such national relevance because they had went and beaten Nick Saban, and they had done it in their own brand and their own style of play. And it was like, okay, for Tennessee fans, it's like they're going to be a problem. I mean, it was going to be a problem. what's interesting to me about the reaction of those two games, and listen, I mean, Tennessee's administration is playing Dixieland Delight after the game, right? They
Mhm.
poke the bear, But in '98, Andy, you were on that field. You were trying to get to the locker room as quick as you could because it was mass chaos. Like there was just
Yes.
people running, going everywhere. The euphoria at Alabama and the Alabama win in 22 was almost just more relief. It was there were mass amounts of people on the field, but there was nobody tore up a fence, nobody dug up turf. Like they just got on the field and like, we don't have to leave, do we? Like, can we just sit here and smoke our cigars? I mean, it was the most there was nothing chaotic about it. I mean, everybody was jubilant, everybody was happy, but it was just we can almost like we can breathe now. It was a very different feeling in terms of intensity on the field after that game compared to the Florida game. And that's one thing. I don't know why that was the case, but that's one thing I'll always remember in comparing the two games because I was on the field at the end of Florida. In fact, there's a video of me like I'm just like trying to not get bumped. I'm against the wall and I'm just trying
It
to
was
scurry
terrifying.
in.
Like
Yeah, you're
people
just trying to
are
scurry
running
into the locker
everywhere.
room.
Yeah.
In Alabama, you're just like everybody's coming up, high fiving each other, and and finally, like the police were like, "All right, we've given y'all an hour, hour and a half on the field. Y'all can leave now. We got to quietly get people out." But it was just the most. I just want to soak it all in type moment, um, which was really weird because both games ended, you know, in dramatic fashion, but
Right. With a
the level of
kick.
intensity
Yeah.
was very different. It was very very odd between the two.
Yeah. So let's set the stage here. So in this situation, Tennessee goes into game 5-0. Alabama's 6-0. This is Tennessee's best start since 2016. Remember 2016, they beat Florida in Knoxville. They win the Dobnail boot game in Athens. The Hail Mary to beat Georgia in Athens. Then they
Which
have
is on
that
the
double over.
yeah, that game is on the list as
Yep.
potential top 5
Yep.
single games, but it's not a plant the flag moment, the Dobnell boot game.
Exactly. They play an incredible double overtime game at Texas A&M. I was at that game as well. That was a crazy game. But it's what happens the week, and this is the difference. And I think it's interesting that Alabama scored 49 points in both of these games. 2016, Alabama, Tennessee. Tennessee is in control of the SEC East, despite losing Texas A&M. Doesn't even matter, really. They lose 49-10 to Alabama. That game is never close. It's never even in doubt for a second that Alabama is going to win that game. And that was sort of okay, you can maybe be the best team in the SEC East, but this is how far you have to go. And then Tennessee ends up losing to South Carolina, and then they wind up champions of life that season. So it's like that was oh no, we're still not out of this crap yet. 22, it was like, no, this is who we are. We can play with anybody now.
Yeah, and I think that was and again, I give Josh Heupel credit. I mean, if you spend any time with Josh Heupel, the bigger the game, the happier he is. He doesn't like games where he's heavily favored. I mean, he relishes that moment. I think that's the competitor in him as a former quarterback. And the story of that game, if you look in the context of Tennessee with General Neelam's maxims, think about it, Andy. They won all parts of it, right? I mean, they won the kicking game. They were the more physical team when you look at how they ran the football in that game. And the biggest thing about that game in 22 that gave you, if you cover this team, or you're a fan of this team, or you're an observer of the SEC, where you said Tennessee might be different. They might be really turning the corner here. Is when something bad happened in that game, they did not flinch. And they had
Yes.
the botched fumble that Alabama picks up and scores on a scoop and score for 6. And everybody in the stands, I don't care. You can come up to me anywhere you want to in the state of Tennessee and say, Hubbs, you're wrong. I don't believe that. I will not believe you that if you're in the stands that moment, you did not have a thought in your head of here we go again.
Yes.
Here we
that
go
made
again.
It 49-42 Tennessee. Right. It was just a read option, and the back thought that Hendon Hooker was going to keep, and Hendon Hooker thought the back was going to, I can't remember which, if it was Small or who the back was on that play, but they got confused and the ball just drops. Dallas Turner picks it up and walks in, and it feels like the game's over.
Yep. It's like, here you go again, right? I mean, Tennessee's been there. That's the Mount Cody block field goal moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the moment where Tennessee turns it over, or they give up a big play like we've seen them do in games during the Butch Jones era, right? There's the moment. Okay, there it is. And Tennessee can't win the close when they haven't figured out how to win one of these games. Tennessee and Josh Heupel at that moment never flinched. Offensively, they got the ball back and they went and they answered immediately. And you said, you know what? Maybe Tennessee's a little different. And then on top of that, at the end of the game, after the missed field goal, they did not play for overtime. They simply said, let's go win now. We're going to keep attacking. And look, Josh Heupel had won the Florida game. They had been a team, Andy, that throws it. They're big plays, everything. This was different. This was, hey, they've got Nick Saban's defensive backfield twisted in knots, turned in knots. Alabama doesn't have answers for what Tennessee's doing. It was Hendon. I thought Hendon Hooker was great against Florida that year. It's a debate on which one he was better in, because he was terrific against Alabama. And to stand in there and make that throw to Brew McCoy to sign it up for the win.
The throw to Brew McCoy that sets up the field goal is probably the best play of Hendon Hooker and Brew McCoy's career so far.
Hendon Hooker made a play. Now, the moment was different, okay?
Yeah.
But if you go back 4 weeks earlier, whatever it was, when they played Florida, Billy Napier had called a timeout to try to get the ball back to extend the lead at the end of the first half, late in the first half. He had Tennessee backed up, had him on a third down, and there was a free blitzer, and Hendon Hooker slid to his left, and just an immediate reaction, and threw it to the tight end for a first down to move the sticks. They go on and score. Tennessee takes momentum into the second half, or in the locker room at the half. They win the quote, the middle eight.
The middle eight, yeah.
Coaches call that. That was a great Hendon Hooker play. But in that moment against Alabama, again, you're trying to slay the dragon. You make that, you stand tall in the pocket, you throw the ball high, you know what I mean? You don't take the sack, you don't get the ball batted down. That was a terrific football play by those two guys. Great box out by Brew McCoy to make the catch. If he holds it a second and a half longer, you don't get the timeout called. The clock's run out, and you give yourself a chance to win the game. I mean, it's just one of those deals where everybody who's a Tennessee fan is going to remember exactly where they were when that play and the field goal took place. You'll never forget where you were.
So let's talk about the game plan itself, because this is the only time that offense, and I'm not talking about Tennessee's offense, I'm talking about this is the Art Briles Baylor offense. Mm-hmm. This is where it comes from. This is the only time any team running that offense, which would be Ole Miss right now, Tennessee right now, Baylor back in the day, Oklahoma the last couple of years, no team running that offense had beaten one of the super teams, had been able to beat Nick Saban or Kirby Smart or any of those. This is the first time anybody had been able to do it. And Heupel does it without his best receiver. Cedric Tillman was out. And he really did it by matching up Jalen Hyatt on players who couldn't keep up with Jalen Hyatt. And poor DeMarco Hellams in this game just got tortured, because basically Tennessee would go in motion in such a way that it would leave DeMarco Hellams sitting out there 20 yards off the line of scrimmage, and then having to deal with Jalen Hyatt coming roaring at him with a 20-yard running start, which even the fastest player in the world is going to struggle to cover Jalen Hyatt in that situation, and you've got a safety trying to do it. It was just brutal to watch for an Alabama fan, because it didn't feel like there was any answer Alabama had.
No, and look, I mean, Jalen Hyatt had made a couple of plays, but if you go back 3 or 4 weeks earlier, they're playing at Pittsburgh, and it was literally Hendon Hooker and Cedric Tillman playing one-on-one. I mean, I think Tillman had like 13 catches in that game. I mean, that was just they won in overtime, and it was the only place they were going with the ball in the passing game was Cedric Tillman, and you came out of that going, all right, that's not going. You didn't know Tillman was going to get hurt, but you're like, there's no way they're going to win a bunch of games if that's the only place and the only way they can throw the football. And so Hyatt starts to develop, and he starts to come on. And obviously, Tennessee found something. If you go back to 21, Andy, Tennessee's in the football game in Tuscaloosa. And a little side note to that story, if you go back and look at the film of that story, Tennessee played basically one side of the field because they were depleted at tackle, I guess it was right tackle. They were playing a walk on at right tackle. And basically, they said, you know what, we can't go that direction. So we've got to play one-handed the other way. But Tennessee got behind Alabama's secondary. Cedric Tillman had a big game. And Tennessee was in that game into the third quarter. Defensively, they couldn't get any stops, and they couldn't keep matching. You know, Hendon Hooker was beat up coming into that game, and he got beat up even more. But Tennessee, you walked out of there and went, okay, this offense can give Alabama some problems. And you thought, okay, Nick Saban's got an entire offseason to figure this out. You know, what are they going to come up with, and what are they going to do? And the fact of the matter is, Tennessee schematically had a couple things for them that they weren't anticipating, they weren't expecting. Obviously, Jalen Hyatt had a career day when you look at it. The unsung hero in that game was Ramel Keaton. You go back to the last drive, Keaton makes a really nice catch there. He's stepping in for Cedric Tillman. He's got 78 yards receiving in that game. You know, Brew McCoy only had 2 catches. Now, the last one was the biggest catch of his career and a catch in lore for Tennessee. But Tennessee runs for 182 yards in that game, averages nearly 5 yards a rush. That's the part of it that gets lost a little bit. And it gets lost in Josh Heupel's offense, Andy, is that they got to run the football. And Alex Golis said it to the television crew leading up to that game. He told me that week, he said, my biggest mistake from 21 is I didn't help us out enough because we didn't stay committed to trying to run the football. He did not get away from running the football in that game. So Alabama had to commit a little extra, and they got the safeties twisted up because they were effective enough running the football that you couldn't just play 7-on-7, if you will, on the back end.
So it's interesting because there's a moment late in the first half where it feels like Tennessee could have put it away, where Hooker misses Ramel Keaton on a deep ball on 4th down. That would have made it 35-17. Tennessee almost gets a Hail Mary at the end of the first half that would have been a touchdown also. But Jahmyr Gibbs, who was awesome in this game, scores to tie it. They get a 2-point and make it 28 all. And then this is where it could have been, you know, Hyatt scores again. So they're up 34-28. But then Alabama scores because they're like McClellan scores. There's a holding call that nullifies it, but then Tennessee gets called for pass interference and Gibbs scores. So it's 35-34 Bama, and Hooker throws it right to DeMarco Hellams on the next possession. This is where I was thinking, that's it. And I'm sure there were a lot of fans in the stands going, okay, this is where Alabama just mushes us. But the D gets a stop, and you have the 78-yard catch and run for Jalen Hyatt, where he's just running away from all of Alabama's defense. And it's like, okay, track meets on again.
Well, I mean, a couple of things. I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs was very interested in Tennessee. Tennessee didn't think he was an offensive player. Neither did anybody else in the SEC, by the way, when he came out of high school. But Tennessee wanted him to be a defensive back. That's why he went to Georgia Tech, because nobody in the SEC thought he was an offensive player. They thought he was a defensive guy. He's pretty good on offense. If you go back and look in the fourth quarter, I mean, his drop on Alabama's last offensive drive is the one that will haunt Alabama fans. Because if he catches that ball there, Tennessee doesn't get a chance at the end. Alabama's going to kick it to win it at the end of the game and break the 49-49 tie, and Tennessee's offense never gets back on the field. But, you know, that's the course of – I mean, that's football. And you're right. I mean, it was track meet back on. And And it was one of those deals where if you're covering that game, if you're calling that game, if you're in the stands of that game, you're just like, if you can just get one stop, because they can't stop us. Alabama can't stop Hendon Hooker. They can't stop this offense. Just get the ball back, right? Limit them to a field goal. I mean, that's a win if they have to kick a field goal. By the way, the pass interference call against Tennessee was a bad call in that game at that point too.
Well, let's talk about pass interference calls.
That one was
we
a
have
bad
to.
call.
We cannot talk about this game without talking about the pass interference call that nullified the Kool-Aid McKinstry interception that allowed Tennessee to keep trying to drive for the game-winning field goal, or ultimately allowed Tennessee to get the ball. But Alabama actually does get a field goal attempt in there too. But let's talk about that particular play, because McKinstry intercepts it. The call's actually on Malachi Moore as he is trying to cover the receiver down the sideline. I don't have a problem with the call. I know every Alabama fan has a problem with the call, but it did really swing things.
Oh, it was a huge call. It's 4th and 5.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fourth down play.
It's a 4th down play, and Tennessee's down a touchdown. I mean, they've got to score there. They have to go. I mean, you can't kick a field goal because you're not going to have enough time there. I think there was contact. I mean, I think that. Listen, I mean, if the pass interference call against Tennessee on the ball that was just floated in the air, where everybody's trying to play the ball, was pass interference, then that call on the McKinstry interception is pass interference all day long. And Alabama, that was a frustrating deal for Alabama, one, because of the impact of that call, but two, that was the most penalized Alabama team Nick Saban had. And I mean, it was pass interference call after pass. They grabbed in the secondary, got called for it all year long, more than they had ever been called for it, which was a bone of contention for Nick Saban. I mean, that team, over 100 yards worth of penalties in multiple games, which was very uncharacteristic for them. That was a pivotal moment. I don't think it was a bad call, but I get if you're an Alabama fan, do you think it's a bad call? Hell yeah, you do. You think it's a disastrous call. Just like you think the other call against Tennessee for pass interference was a disastrous call. So that's the ebbs and flows of a college football game. It's what makes football great, but in particular college football great, because it's just a couple of plays here and there that are the difference in the game. And Tennessee made enough at the end. Alabama didn't make enough, and as a result, Tennessee fans feel like they sent Nick Saban into retirement. Now, they really didn't, but they think that was the start of sending him, into retirement, and they got a chance to beat him in his final game in Neyland Stadium, just like Johnny Majors beat Bear Bryant in Bear Bryant's final game in Neyland Stadium. So there's some oozing in the tradition there in that rivalry for sure.
So we talked about the Brew McCoy catch already, but let me ask you this. If I told you before that game, it's going to come down to a Chase McGrath kick, and he's going to kick a knuckleball, what do you think's going to happen?
I mean, you're just sitting there. Here it is. I mean, can they execute it and get it done? Because, again, I know I'm telling old stories, but I go back to the Mount Cody block kick, and I'm in the booth calling the game for the Vol Network, and Jim Chaney's to my right, and there's a bad set of blinds that are about half tore up. And Luke Stockner catches the ball, and basically Tennessee stops at that point and says, okay, we're going to kick it to win it. And it's like, it's a 45-yard kick. Like, we're sitting, I'm going, are you not going to run another play? And I'm just kind of shaking my head. And Jim Chaney's like, oh, no. He just looks over at me and kind of gives me, hey, just the relax deal. And I'm like, no. Sebastian Janikowski's not kicking this for Lane Kiffin here. This is not how it works. You need to be closer. And obviously the kick had no chance in that game. So you fast forward to 22, and there you are. Okay, here's Chase McGrath. He's got his opportunity. Can they complete this thing? I mean, they're finally knocking on the door. They've got a real chance. I mean, Butch Jones had Alabama had the lead against Alabama and Tuscaloosa in the fourth quarter, couldn't get off the field. Tennessee had been somewhat close a couple of times and couldn't finish it. Could they actually finish it? They botched the protection up front, nearly get it blocked. I thought Nick Saban was going to call a second timeout. I think McGrath thought he was too, because McGrath actually kind of double hitches on his approach. And that was the most beautiful, ugly kick any Tennessee fan has seen in a long, long time, because it was ugly. But the result of it was obviously beautiful and euphoria for everybody in orange.
And credit to the CBS production crew. Our pal Craig Silver did such great work on those SEC games, and it's going to be weird this year not seeing that CBS broadcast. But so you see it's a great shot from behind Chase McGrath as it knuckles through the uprights, and then they go to the blimp shot of the orange pyro coming out of Neyland Stadium as the people pour onto the field. Like, it's iconic.
Yeah. I mean, it's listen, if you're in production or you're calling a game as a broadcaster or whatever, you don't know when those moments are going to come when you start the day. But when the moment's there, can you capture it either verbally or visually? And CBS and Brad Nessler and the production of it, I mean, captured the end of that game beautifully. I mean, it's simple, but and here they come, and there's people coming everywhere, and it's the orange fireworks, and it's just that it was beautiful. I mean, it was terrific production. Anybody that knows anything about video production, you just, tip your cap and say, well done, because when the moment is there, you don't want to butcher the moment or botch the moment or miss the moment. And man, they were spot on, and they were spot on visually, which is not the easiest thing to do. Whoever's sitting there as a director, Craig Silverno, got going, let's go to the overhead blimp shot in the dark, because we just know these fireworks are going to hit just at the right time. I mean, they just hit the moment perfectly, Andy. They really did.
Yeah, and I feel like it was Tennessee hitting the moment perfectly, because this was a game Tennessee needed. This was a game that the entire fan base needed. It had been a long walk through the wilderness at that point, and it felt like that was them saying, we're back.
Yes, because you could not walk. Look, that we talked about the misplays here, questionable call here, whatever. There's no way, and Nick Saban, to his credit, didn't. Nobody walked out of there going, man, that was the luckiest win ever. That was such a fluke.
Right.
And listen, we have upsets through the years where they're flukes, right? I mean, Doug Flutie throwing the ball 78 yards, 45 years ago or whatever it is now, that's a fluky play, right? I mean, Hail Marys are just luck, I mean, in a lot of ways. There's nothing fluke about this game when you look at how Tennessee won. They overcame adversity late. They made the plays that they had to make down the stretch. They were physical. They ran the football. Alabama did not push them around. They couldn't bully Tennessee. And all the notion about the finesse of Josh Heupel and the finesse of what Tennessee was, there was nothing finesse about the win, and there was nothing fluky about the win, which is why everybody looks at that game as a plant the flag moment, as a, hey, Tennessee's back, Tennessee's arriving, Josh Heupel's really building something here. This is not the, goofy offense or Mickey Mouse offense or whatever you want to label it as. This is an offense that works, and it works in this league. And if you're going to prove that it works, you got to go beat the big boys. And they went and beat Alabama that day to prove that, you know what? Put us in the conversation, because we're not just a fluky little offense that plays 7-on-7 while everybody else is playing big boy ball, because we can play big boy ball too.
Very well said, Brent. Very well said. And I will recommend. Now, Alabama fans don't bother doing this, so I'm not going to torture you with this. But anybody else, Tennessee fans obviously probably do this once a month. But if you just love college football and you miss college football right now, that game's on YouTube. Just watch it. You will rekindle your joy and your love for college football pretty much immediately. It is just, the drama is perfect. The twists and the turn, like, it starts at a breakneck pace and it kind of slows down a little bit, and then it just goes into like whiplash mode at the end. It is about as fun of a college football game as you'll ever watch. Again, Alabama fans, I understand if you don't want to watch it. Everybody else, like, go ahead and you're going to get fired up that college football is coming back and that Alabama's going to be playing at Neyland Stadium again this season. And I can't wait to see it. Brent, thank you so much.
Thanks, Andy. Appreciate it, man.
Thanks to Brent Hubbs. That game was incredible. That shot of the fireworks going off at Neyland Stadium with the crowd pouring onto the field, you'll never forget that. If you were at the game, you will never forget where you sat. You'll never forget where you wound up. If you wound up carrying the goalposts out of the stadium, you'll never forget it. But what a Saturday that was. Let's go to a different Saturday, a season earlier. Michigan had been losing to Ohio State over and over and over again. For once, Michigan wasn't coming off a season where it had lost to Ohio State, but only because they hadn't played Ohio State in that 2020 season that was shortened by COVID. Things were very dark for Jim Harbaugh in Michigan. Things were looking up for Ryan Day in Ohio State. When Ohio State came into the Big House on a snowy day in November, and Michigan turned the whole thing around. Here's Chris Balas from the Wolverine talking about that day. We are joined now by Chris Balas of the Wolverine. We continue our My Favorite Games series, and he has picked a doozy. The 2021 Ohio State-Michigan game. And I know what you're probably saying. Wait, why not 2023 when Sharon Moore was coaching Michigan? Chris, I'm going to let you have the floor here.
Yeah.
To help set the scene for this one, because I agree with you. I think this is the perfect choice for a Michigan person to pick this game. So let's go back. And what was it about this game that made you decide this is my favorite?
Yeah, well, you knew it was going to be an Ohio State game, right? If it's Michigan, it couldn't be. And there have been some classic games with Notre Dame over the years. You had the 3 overtime game with Michigan State in 2004. Everybody calls the Braylon Edwards game. And, I'm a little older, so I could even go back and probably remember some of the 80s and late 70s games. But, this one really changed the course of the rivalry, kind of like the 1969 game did when, Bo Schembechler comes in and he says, Ohio State, this is going to be, now this is our focus, right? Anything else that happens, it all matters, but it doesn't matter if you don't beat Ohio State. And he kind of set that expectation. And Jim Harbaugh, in 2020, after that lousy season and after 2019, he says, we're going to beat Ohio State or we're going to die trying, right? And I think Ohio State fans would say, yeah, then you got Connor Stallions going out to games and so on and so forth, and that's how you did it. But I don't think that's the case at all, and I think most people around college football wouldn't say that. But this is the one, right? It had been 17 years since they'd won a Big Ten title, which is unbelievable, right? And going back to 2004, and that one was shared, and they just could not get over that Ohio State hump. And they had to do it one year, Andy, and to get themselves to believe that they could again and to make this a rivalry again. That's what made this game so important.
So at this point, Ohio State has won 8 straight. Yep. They've won 15 of 16. Do Michigan people even count 2011? Because that was the year that Luke Fickell was the interim at Ohio State. Tressel had been run off and because of the NCAA stuff, and then Meyer was about to come in. It feels like for a Michigan fan, it probably just felt like that entire time was a losing streak, right?
Yeah, it did. And, you had to win. And I'll tell you what, they could have lost that game too. There was a wide open at the end of that game where a cornerback blows the coverage and Ohio State could have pulled that one out. But, with Brady Hoke, though, you kind of thought the way he took the rivalry too, and you thought, okay, a good start. But then when Urban Meyer comes in, your expectations are tempered. This guy's going to win and it's going to be tough for them to win. And they came close, but they could never get over the hump. So it did. It felt like 15 years in the wilderness there when, and this has been a weird rivalry. Michigan owned it when John Cooper was there, 10-2-1. And then you've got the other side. It wasn't like the 70s and wasn't like the 80s, like everybody thinks, oh, this is a back and forth rivalry. It's one team owns it and then another team owns it for the last 20 years. And Ohio State happened to own it. So, yeah, it was nice to win that one. And you hoped that it would set the table for more success down the road. It just didn't happen.
So let's go back to 2019. So at this point, 2018 was the one where Michigan came in favored and then Ohio State blew them out. But this is 2019. So this is Ohio State has come into Michigan Stadium. This is Ryan Day's first year, and they have blown out Michigan. It has been an embarrassment. And Jim Harbaugh gets asked a question after the game that I think a lot of Michigan fans were asking at the time.
Jim, is this a talent gap? Is it a preparation gap? Is it a coaching gap? What is the biggest difference between you and Ohio State at this point?
I mean, I'll answer your questions, not your insults. So
that wasn't an insult. You gave 118 points in 2 years.
they played really good. They played good.
100 yards. That's what I'm asking. What's the biggest difference in the gap between you guys?
They played better today.
On the right, Austin. You can just go ahead and ask it, Austin.
Yeah, Jim, I guess just follow up on that. Moving forward, what are the areas where you feel like your program needs to progress to be able to close that gap?
We'll regroup and come back and play our next game. Regroup and retool. Get our guys back, prepare for our next ball game.
He has no answers.
No.
There are no answers. And so then you have the 2020 season, which is a disaster. The Ohio State game gets canceled mercifully, probably for Michigan, because that would have been ugly. Then Jim Harbaugh's salary is cut by Word Manual. Like, everything was going wrong. It actually looked like they might fire him. Instead, they cut his pay, and he does the bet on myself thing. But, as you mentioned earlier, beat Ohio State or die trying, which he says at Big Ten Media Days in 2021, while they've got a retooled coaching staff, things have changed. Like, we laughed at him nationally when he said that.
Yeah.
But he had been doing the things, like, he couldn't answer those questions then in 2019.
Yep.
He found the answers between 2020 and 2021, it seems like.
Yeah, and part of that is he got back to his roots, Stapes, right? And they gone with the speed and space crap, and they had the defense with Don Brown that wasn't great in a lot of games, but Ohio State had them figured out, And for all the talk about sign stealing and stuff, they were very confident that Ohio State knew what they were running. Nothing nefarious, right? They didn't. It's not like they were, okay, they had somebody in the stands and they were stealing signs.
They were predictable.
They were predictable. Right.
Yeah.
And somebody told us that all they had to do was put the tight end in motion, and they knew what Michigan was going to be doing, whether it was, pat zone or man, and it was usually man, and who they could pick on. And they did, and it demoralized the defense. But I think Jim Harbaugh got back to his roots, and he said, okay, I can win the way that I won at Stanford, and I'm going to get back to playing smash mouth football. We're going to put the speed and space stuff away. We're going to get in there, and we're going to blow them out on the offensive line. We're going to get after them defensively and not be so aggressive, because when you're aggressive, as you know, that aggressive against Ohio State is a recipe for disaster. So you get Mike McDonald in there, and you get Jesse Minter in there, and guys that really run that Ravens system and confuse quarterbacks instead of giving them free reign to go out there and shoot ducks, so to speak. So I think that was really a big part of the difference. And then what he would say, and what we've been talking about for years, guys like Aiden Hutchinson and that senior class said enough is enough, right? I'm not going out this way. This is an embarrassment. My dad played here. It's time for us to change this thing.
So let's set the scene. It's Ann Arbor, Thanksgiving weekend, 2021. There's a light snow falling as the game starts, kind of a just flurries,
Right.
But it's the perfect. The HD picture on Fox is amazing, and I'm sure it was even better in person.
Yeah.
Gus Johnson starts the game out as Ohio State is kicking off to Michigan by pointing out that Ohio State has won 8 straight and 15 of 16. Michigan gets that opening kickoff. 3 3rd-and-1 or 3rd-and-2 conversions on the first drive, leading to the Henning end around for a touchdown. And you're like, okay, this is the tone Michigan wants to set.
Right. And we'd seen that before, in a game a couple years ago and earlier, and you're thinking, okay, but then the dam breaks, right? And the defense gives it up. But they came on and it was really even. We were talking in the press box about the approach and what we saw on the field during warmups. And you could just tell that these Michigan kids were ready to play, right? They came out smoking. They were just really fired up. And there was just an energy in the air where you thought, okay, I predicted them to lose, I'll be honest. And I think most of us did. But there was just something different that where you felt, okay, these guys are ready to end this and put this misery behind them. So, but yeah, that first drive really kind of set the tone, and you could sense the barking from the guys up front, the offensive line, which had been dominant on the ground, Andy, to that point throughout the year, right? If you go back to the Washington game earlier in the year, I mean, they were the Joe Moore Award winners for a reason, but you were just wondering, could they do it against a defense like Ohio State? And they did. They went right down the field. The A.J. Henning touchdown was a beautiful play call, one that they'd kept in their back pocket all year. And you're thinking, okay, if you can hold them to 3 or keep them off the board here, on their first drive, then we're going to really might have a chance here. And
that first drive, so they muff a fair catch.
Yeah.
Ohio State has to start on its own 4. They go 3 and out, and they got a punt. And Michigan gets incredible field position because Henning has a great punt return there. Right. And then McNamara makes a really good throw early in that drive. But then I can imagine just the feeling in Michigan Stadium when Bryson Shaw picks off Cade McNamara right in front of the goal line, and it's like, oh no, here, because then Ohio State's offense starts to march, and it's like, uh-oh.
Yeah, missed opportunity, right? And has been really the theme of the close games in this rivalry, and there were several of them in 15 years. Josh Metellus, safety, Michigan's up, I think, 14-0 against Ohio State, and I think it was 2017. If he makes a pick at the goal line, you know what? They probably win that game or have a good chance of doing it, even shorthanded. But that was the one where you're like, okay. But let's go back to that first drive, though. There was a snap where they fumbled it, and then 3 and out, Ohio State series, and you're thinking, okay, they look flustered, and that's not something that we were used to seeing from them. It was louder than I've heard it in years. So then you're thinking, man, if McNamara, if they score there, Andy, then it's really going to be looking.
It was over if they scored there.
Exactly. Terrible pass, but you know what? It is what it is, and you're wondering how he's going to respond, Cade McNamara, and people will give him enough credit, I think, for the way he responded in that game too, and what he did for that team.
Well, and let's remember, on the other side, C.J. Stroud is Ohio State's quarterback. Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave are the 2 leading receivers. There's a young Marvin Harrison Jr. on the team, but he is not one of the major targets yet. Right. But you're going to see a lot of Chris Olave and a lot of Garrett Wilson in this game, a lot of Jackson Smith-Jigba, who was also a first-rounder. He was probably their best receiver in this game. And so they start out, they're throwing the ball to him. They're finally moving the ball down the field. But in what becomes a theme of this game, big third down sacks. So Aiden Hutchinson sacks C.J. Stroud on third down in the red zone, and Ohio State has to settle for a field goal. That was a huge play. I think that was one of the biggest plays of this game.
Yeah, they could not block him. And it was interesting. We had his dad on a podcast who was an All-American at Michigan. And I said, anytime did you think they were going to maybe help over there and adjust? He goes, oh, no. The big boys, you know what? They got these egos. We can take them. We can handle them. They couldn't, Stapes. And that was one of the differences in the game. I kept waiting for them to adjust and maybe try to neutralize Hutchinson a little bit. They did not. And it came back to bite them time and time again.
The problem, though, is that Jabo's so good on the other side. It really was a little pick your poison at that point. If you did help on Hutch, you were probably dealing with a one-on-one with a Jabo, and you're probably going to lose some of those too. Right. So that's something that I think, because Hutchinson gets all the play, and Hutchinson has become the better NFL player because Jabo, remember, he got hurt going to the pre-draft situation. So we really haven't gotten a chance to see as much of him in the NFL. Right. But that was an incredible pass rushing tandem that you couldn't do much with. So, but I think that, that holding of a field goal was big because Ohio State comes back again and scores. JSN is catching the ball and catching those short ones and running. And this was a beautiful, the touchdown drive for Ohio State ends with a beautiful throw and an incredible catch by Garrett Wilson along the sideline and falling into the end zone. Like the coverage was perfect. There's just was nothing you could do about it. And that's one of those that I'm sure Michigan fans, because Ohio State is taking the lead at this point, and you're going, okay, this is the problem with playing Ohio State, because sometimes they have players that are so great that you can do everything right and it doesn't matter.
Right. And they had some drop passes. There was one in the end zone that they had that's uncharacteristic, and I think some blame the snow, but they threw for 396 yards in that game. That's what people don't remember, and you made a great point. For Michigan, it was about keeping them out of the end zone, right? They were going to get their yards. They were going to get some points, but you had to keep them out of the end zone, and you had to shorten the game a little bit and with the running game, which is exactly what they did. But some of those throws and catches, even late in that game, right, when they'd get down by 2 scores, you know what? Boom, you're getting 35 yards on one pass. Boom, you're scoring in 1 minute. And you never felt comfortable, right, until the end of that game, because that offense was so explosive. And, of course, we knew what Stroud could do.
And now it's interesting because I like to compare the 2021 and 2022 games, because they kind of unfold in a similar way, but not exactly. Like the 2022 game was a lot of J.J. McCarthy and Cornelius Johnson keeping Michigan in it until Michigan could find its run game. This one, the run game's working, but you're so scared of what C.J. Stroud's going to do to you on the other side. You just never feel comfortable. So Michigan punches one in before the half. It's 14-13. Then they come out in the second half. Their first possession of the second half is a 3-play, 81-yard drive with 2 massive Blake Corum runs to kick it off, and then a Haskins touchdown to cap it. But this is where Blake Corum makes his presence known in this rivalry.
Yeah, and really, he wasn't 100% either. He had the big run, and you could see him hobbling there. Otherwise, he probably doesn't get caught. But I can't stress enough how big it was for them to take the lead at the half, right? Because that's when you got the sense that, okay, they went into that tunnel, and all hell broke loose, man. They were going after each other. There were a lot of middle fingers. These guys were yelling. They were screaming. They had to be separated. And you thought, okay, these guys are like, all right, we're not backing down here. We are not intimidated by you anymore. Right, we've got the lead here, and then you come out and you punch that one in, and you're thinking they got a real shot to win this game, Andy. Especially if they're going to be able to run the ball like they did.
Now, I don't think I'm being, I don't think I'm overstating it here when I say that the next drive for Michigan when they had the ball is one of the most important drives in Michigan football history.
Yeah,
because of all that was going on. So let's break everything down. So basically, before that, to get the ball back, you had another Aiden Hutchinson third down sack of C.J. Stroud. That gets them the ball back. So this next drive, J.J. McCarthy gets snuck in there at quarterback to make a throw to Roman Wilson that I'm not sure Cade McNamara could have made. And I remember watching that game at home and thinking, that's a different look.
Yeah, and Gus got fooled, right? And he said McCarthy to Wilson, and I'm like, that wasn't, I was at the game, but we were kind of.
He said McNamara to Wilson. He's like, wait, and then Joel Klatt's like, no, that's not
McNamara, right? Throwing that bullet, but you got a sense here, and then Cade comes back out, and Cade made some nice deep throws in that game too. He had one to Cornelius Johnson. Early in the game, he had another one on the flea flicker to Mike Sainristil, who was playing
well, and that's on this drive. So exactly. They give to Haskins, he pitches back and throw to Sainristil, who he'll switch positions in the offseason and make one of the biggest plays ever in the next Ohio State-Michigan game. But that was a pretty big one. But so they bring McCarthy back in after that play. And McCarthy runs it down the left sideline. He gets to about the Ohio State 2. It's not what happens with McCarthy on that play. It's what happens away from the play.
Yes.
And then what happens next that I think is one of the most important moments in the history of this series. So you've got McCarthy getting tackled over on the left sideline. In the middle of the end zone, you've got a little fracas with Cameron Brown and Roman Wilson. And Roman Wilson's helmet gets ripped off. Then you see the entire Michigan offensive line come after Cameron Brown. It was we are protecting our guy. This is who we are. This is our culture now. Jerome Moore, by the way, has been moved to offensive line coach from tight ends coach in this. all of the things that you saw in 2023 that led to the national championship, the seeds were right there if you were watching for them in 2021.
It was a complete culture change from some of the teams that Harbaugh had with some of the NFL prima donnas. I'm not going to name them, but guys were just there and they couldn't wait to get out, right? And but the really cool thing about that was those linemen come over there, they get in his face, but they don't cross the line, right? The 15-yard penalty.
They got flagged. He
exactly.
did.
Exactly. Yeah. Because somebody ripped Wilson's helmet off and he tosses it to midfield, and that's what got the offensive lineman over there. But they kept their cool. In the past, maybe you have offsetting 15-yarders or something, and that, or maybe an extra 15-yard penalty. Didn't happen, but you could tell that these guys were playing for each other, that this was different, and that's, I think, the moment that we all felt that, okay, Michigan's got a really good chance to win this football game.
Yeah, and so that play is, they're on the 2. It's half the distance to the goal. It's a 1-yard penalty, essentially. Right. But you could not have a more massive play that's more symbolic. And also in the game at the time, in the flow of the game, that is a big message to be sent to the Ohio State sideline. Because as you pointed out, the Michigan guys did not get penalized. But let's be real. If you're Cameron Brown and 5 300-pound dudes come at you, you're not going to swing on one of them. No, they don't need to do anything else. They just need to be there and be imposing, which they were.
Yeah, they were the enforcers, and there was a little bit of mingling, but you didn't see the whole Ohio State bench come over or anything like that, and you just got the sense that, okay, we're protecting our guy, right? And that's who these guys are, and they epitomize the turnaround of the culture. Really, they'll be remembered forever for that. The Trevor Keegans and the Zach Zinters and the Barnharts and those guys, and man, what an unbelievable scene that was. And again, that's when we knew, all in the press box, we all said the same thing. Okay, Michigan's going to win this football game.
Except CJ Stroud on the next drive converts a 3rd and 19 and a 4th and 4 with throws to Jackson Smith and Jigba. Ohio State scores on a Travion Henderson run, and all of a sudden it's 28-20, and it's like, oh, come on. It's still not over. I imagine when those plays got converted, everybody in the stadium just sort of sucks in their breath. Is like, oh boy.
Yeah, no question about it. I know people who were there, friends of mine who left and were underneath the, they couldn't stand to watch, the heart, was racing and they were so nervous because, okay, we know this is our moment, but is it going to be taken from us again type of thing? So that was really, okay, how do you respond to that? And, a lot of people were saying, keep it on the ground. And I go back to the 1996 game, right? At some point, and every offensive lineman I've ever talked to at Michigan has said, we want the ball up by a touchdown or up by 3 points with a chance to run the game out at the end of the game. Keep running behind us and let's do this thing. They didn't have to throw a pass, Andy. And that was what was so brilliant about that. And they were so dominant up front. And Hassan Haskins, probably one of the more underrated backs to ever play for Michigan, will never be forgotten. But some of the runs he had, right, with the footwork and the broken tackles were unbelievable. That was his drive. That was his moment. And then, of course, he had this signature leap down there at the end of one of those runs. They let him score, but by then, it was over. But that was really when they solidified their Joe Moore Award winning. That drive really summed up that team extremely well.
9-play, 66-yard drive took 4 minutes and 51 seconds. Every play is a run, every pass or every yardage gaining play is a run. Some by Haskins, some by McNamara. They did throw it on 3rd and 2, which was kind of going against.
That's right. Against
type, but they draw a pass interference penalty on Denzel Burke on Roman Wilson that actually, moves Ohio State into the red zone. So that was. Moves Michigan in the red zone. But that was an incredible drive. And as you mentioned, so they score, Ohio State answers, and then Michigan just does it again with a drive that is all Haskins runs.
Yeah.
Nothing but, now, as you said, they let him score at the end, but he had gotten him, he had essentially ended the game already.
Yeah, 5 touchdowns, right? And that really cements your legacy, right? As a Buckeye killer, right? We can point to St. Risto, we can go back to Haskins and guys like that. We talked about Corum and his runs, but that was Hassan Haskins' game. And again, just to brutalize them up front like they did, The final rushing total was 362 or something like that. And just unbelievable what they were able to accomplish against a solid defensive line. We'd seen it against opponents where you're like, yeah, they should be doing that. And we expect that. But against Ohio State in that game, there's a reason that the team that wins the running battle in this game usually wins the game. And but they flat out dominated. So and you're still, even at that point, a couple minutes left, and you're thinking, let's just get off the field here and let's end this thing, because we've seen it before, man. Weird things happen, and not this time. And then did start coming out a bit harder.
Got another third down sack, but this time it was from Ojabo.
Right.
That it set up, pretty desperation, fourth down, terrible down and distance at that point, and Ohio State couldn't convert, and that was the end of the game. By that point, the snow was pouring down, by the way.
Yeah.
It was exactly what you'd want as a viewer who had no rooting interest in the game.
Yeah.
That's what I want to see at the Ohio State Michigan game. I want it just pouring snow.
Yeah.
But I imagine for the Michigan fans there, the catharsis was just incredible. And you look up and all the flakes are falling down. It had to be pretty amazing.
It was unreal. And then he flooded the field, right? And, sometimes it's not warranted. This time it absolutely was. And the party wasn't ending. And when we did that podcast with Chris Hutchinson, and he said, my son's over there crying, and he's looking to the sky. He said he got teary remembering that. And, he had his family down there with him. He had the players behind them and the fans behind him when they were interviewing him. And then I've got to tell you, it was almost, an inch an hour after that. It was like it just waited until the end of the game. And walking back to the car, I'll never forget. I went back and the lights were still on the stadium, and you could see the snow coming down. And I'm thinking it'll never get any better than this. I get chills thinking about it when I was walking back to my car, and then the lights go off in Michigan Stadium. And I think Bob Uford, Michigan's old announcer, that's all there is. There isn't any more, and it was just fantastic. What a day.
But there was more.
Yeah.
Because they go to Columbus and do it again the following year, and then take another step by winning the Big Ten by, getting, now they lost in the playoff to TCU.
Yep.
But that TCU loss convinces everybody to come back. And in 2023, they do it again, except Jim Harbaugh suspended for the Ohio State game, and Sharon Moore, it's the coach. And then they go and win the national title. It is amazing how things turned right there that day.
Yeah, and they had to validate the 21 win with the 22 win in Columbus, right? And they did that. And then, everybody's talking about the sign stealing, but Ohio State, the coaches admitted, yeah, we knew that there was something up. We changed our signs before the 2022 game. But then Ryan Day goes all in 2023. I could have easily picked that game too, Andy, as one, because that's the one that you really had to validate that, okay, this had nothing to do with cheating. This had nothing to do with anything but us kicking your ass up and down the field for a third straight year. And the way they did that one as well, unbelievable. Rod Moore, that's a script. The Buckeye killer, kid from Ohio that didn't get the Ohio State offer, making the interception at the end of the game. Ryan Day walking with his head down, having put everything into that, saying, hey, we knew, saying on local television, we knew, there's some crazy things and weird things going on in the last 2 years. No excuses this time, Andy. No snow, no sign stealing crap. Just a win on the way to the national championship. What a year.
And now they're in the same position, probably if they were to come back and win the game in the rivalry this year, and I talk about, to an Ohio State person about how it's their favorite game, I would probably start with a clip from Ryan Day's press conference after the 2023 game.
Right.
Where, like Harbaugh in 2019, he has no answers.
No.
There are no answers. And you just got to find them. And that's why I think the 2021 game is so important, because that's when it showed that Harbaugh had found the answers.
Finally. 0-6 or 0-5 to that point, and would have been 0-6, right? If they'd played.
Yeah, if they'd played. Yeah.
And, but that was it. And you know what? And he got back to his roots, like I said, and proved that you don't have to be, a track meet on grass or whatever. You can win with good, hard-nosed Big Ten football. You can win a national championship. Doesn't hurt to have a great defense too, though, Andy. Right.
I was gonna say it doesn't hurt to have elite edge rushers
exactly
come screaming off and sack that opposing quarterback, who turns out he's pretty good too. CJ Stroud is a common theme in these shows because he was very tough to beat.
Yeah.
So
Stroud and Nico Collins now down there is fantastic. It's kind of fun listening to I don't think either one of those guys beat the other one when they were at their school. So there's no crap to be talked,
Exactly. Exactly. Well, Chris, this has been so much fun. I hope everybody else enjoyed it as much as I did. If you get a chance, go back and watch the full version of that game, the condensed version of that game. It is fascinating knowing what we know now to watch that 2021 game, because it really, if you watched closely as Michigan moved to the national title through 2023, all of the seeds were planted there in 2021.
That was it. That was the one, and that's the why I picked it, brother.
Thanks, Chris.
You bet. Have a great one.
Thank you to Chris Balas. What a game that was, and it also kind of told the future for what was going to happen in that rivalry for the next few years. We'll see if Ohio State can turn it around this year, and who knows? Maybe if they do, this will be some Ohio State fans' favorite game down the road. That's the beauty of the 2024 season. Nothing's happened yet. Nobody's played any actual games. We don't know which one might be our favorite by the end of the season, but it's fun to imagine what could come next, and it's fun to go back to some of these great games. We're going to do it again on Friday when we talk to Jake Rowe of Dogs HQ about the Georgia-Ohio State Peach Bowl, and then we talk to Spencer Holbrook of Letterman Row about the Alabama-Ohio State Sugar Bowl after the 2014 season. 2 incredible games that I cannot wait to relive with you. We'll talk to you soon.